When I was standing there about like the factory and this whole shit and all that, it's actually, people, a lot of times people ask me like, how were you there at all these things when you were so fucking young? I mean, you should have been at school and, playing with Legos and shit like that, Well, actually, my mom was a big part of that whole factory scene, and which is ultimately why I wound up subjected to that whole shit, I'll say. Because it really wasn't, an environment that any kind of a child should have ever been in, to be honest. A couple of people are laughing. But I was actually, I think I was conceived at the Chelsea because that's where my parents met. So, I really have kind of been like...
You were conceived at the Chelsea, it's a fact.
Yeah, it actually is. I just don't like to say that because I wasn't really there. I was, being made there. But that's pretty much why my journey began the way it did, was because I come from a long line of freaks and rock and rollers, and
So talking about that,
I enjoyed that. Did you guys enjoy that film?
Yeah.
I mean, I know everybody kept saying how much they sucked, but they didn't sound that bad to me. Am I wrong? I mean, I've seen a lot of worse punk bands. I've seen a lot of worse hardcore bands. That shit didn't sound that bad. I would have been thrilled as a motherfucker to catch those shows. But it's actually funny because I see a couple people in the crowd that I know, and I'm like, oh shit, like there's my old singer, Patrick. That's definitely, I can tell by the body language and the haircut. And I'm like, oh shit, there's Nick. So, we were actually I was supposed to do a gig there. Like he was playing Saturday and Sunday, and we were supposed to play Monday, and what happened was he got arrested for the Nancy situation, which, none of us, the people around at the time, and none of the people that knew any of those people, none of us think he did that shit. I mean, but it was just an easy scapegoat, and it was really just an open and shut case. But, anybody who knows anything about stabbings, I'm sure some of you do. I've been stabbed. I've stabbed a couple people I know a little bit. You don't. You never stabbed anybody?
Yes.
You don't stab someone one time like that deep. That's just not how it goes down. Just touching someone with a knife, it's usually going to go pretty deep. It's not going to be like, ding. And, anybody who's ever been in any kind of a violent confrontation knows that, you don't just poke somebody once and then it's like, okay, we're done. Stabbings usually go down like pretty grim, You usually get stabbed multiple times and it's usually like fucking deep. Everybody I know believes that, and that, she poked herself and kind of like bled out while he was fucked up, because, some of you gotta be close to my age, right? Remember when remember back in, I guess it was the late 80s or 90s when there was that thing, like everybody was a cutter, they were like, oh, all these girls are cutters. Well, that shit was pretty normal in punk days. Everybody was a fucking cutter. I used to cut shit in myself and carve shit myself, and I was like 12. So it was like, it was just like punk rock, So the idea of her poking herself to like get his attention or some shit, or, that seems more realistic to me.
I've heard that. I've also heard that Sid was a very sweet person, but just sort of
I couldn't tell you. I was really looking forward to meeting him, and I was actually in London when he got arrested, and so I was like really bummed. I was like 12, and I was the hugest fan. But I probably would have been a little disappointed if I had met him because he was pretty much a mess, and I knew, Johnny Thunders and the Dead Boys and all those people, obviously the Ramones, I grew up around all those people, and as a kid, I didn't really have much of a fondness for junkies. There was a lot of heroin shit going on in my neighborhood. If you ever seen photos of the Lower East Side back in the late 70s, even the early 80s, it had that, you know, that old school South Bronx vibe where it was like more buildings were burnt down than there were actually buildings standing. And you'd have buildings that they were dealing smack, and the lines would literally come out the building, wrap around the block and down the block, and it was like business as usual, you know. The fucking dudes would be like, you know, getting their dicks sucked online, and chicks were like trying to move up the front of the line.
Right.
Like it was grim. I mean, it was fucking, you know, I'm sure,
Sure, dude.
I'm sure you see that type of shit out here with like all the fucking meth heads and the crackheads, but it was fucking bad, you know? So like, even as a kid, I had kind of a disdain for people who were into shooting drugs. Of course, you know, by the time I was 15, I was shooting drugs myself. But, hey, you know, that's another
It's a different story.
Yeah, it's another story for another time.
Talk about that. It's fascinating to me. So this fucking chaotic, crazy fucking warriors escape from New York world. You're playing music. How did you get into the stimulus? I know your Aunt Denise is in it, but how did you start playing drums? When you see footage of this movie of this fucker playing drums at 12, it's mind blowing. It's fucking mind blowing. You're like a little kid. I mean, you were a little kid. How did it happen? And how did you get into music? I'm guessing the arts and music really helped you get through some horrific times.
Yeah, but they also, you know, caused quite a few.
Still caused.
Yeah, I mean, I you know, I got PTSD like a motherfucker, and a lot of it's from, you know, childhood trauma and shit from going back to then, you know. But what happened was, I was already a drummer when I had been living in Europe. I don't know how many people know my shit. Check out my book. Sales plug right here. But when I was living in Europe, that's when I was in my first punk band, and that was like 77. We did like one tour or whatever. So I was already like a musician, you know, an active player when I was 10. And so when I moved to New York, every time I would come and visit my aunt every, you know, other summer or whatever, and this was before punk, so we would jam and we'd be doing like fucking Ted Nugent covers and shit like that, Stormtrooping, Cat Scratch Fever, just like goddamn practice with her and Ann rocking out. And then one time I came back and she had formed this band, the Stimulators, which had happened because how many of you people remember like the first time the Damned broke up and then they came back as the Doomed? Does anybody remember that? Like this is